Dr. Elliott Meets the Unexpected, where we delve deep into the mysteries that straddle the line between scientific inquiry and paranormal. Get ready for a mind-altering journey as we embark on this phenomenal discovery together on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM.
We're live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are broadcasting live here on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. And we are your hosts. I'm Dr. Yana, and this is handsome Dr. Elliott. And we're your hosts on Science and the Paranormal, where we are working to unravel the enigmas that have puzzled humanity for centuries. We will be speaking with experts, researchers, and eyewitnesses who have firsthand knowledge with the unexplained. And together, we will explore the intersection of science, skepticism, and supernatural. Whether you're a believer in the paranormal or a longstanding skeptic, this podcast is your invitation into an exploration of the unknown alongside us. Today we have an amazing special guest. She's a clinical psychologist, Dr. Sherry Punch, and we will be discussing paranormal through cognitive processes, perception, memory, and suggestion. Let's welcome Dr. Sherry Punch.
Dr. Sherry Punch, welcome to Science and the Paranormal.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
And this is so incredible. We're going to be talking about the connection between the paranormal and actually the cognitive processes, whether we perceive everything correctly or probably the mind is playing some tricks on us. Let's talk about it.
Indeed, let's unravel the unexplained.
Unexplained, that's right. That's right. So, Dr. Sherry, I know that as a clinical psychologist that you worked with memory and perception. What can you tell us about the role of memory in the cognitive processes pertaining to the understanding of some paranormal processes or anything that is unexplained?
Well, I think when we think of cognition, we think of perception, or perception is a big factor in cognition. And what we see, our perception is our five senses. It's how we interpret reality, how we see the world, how our environment affects us. Cognition is the process of learning, knowing, acquiring information. It's our conscious awareness. With regard to memory, memory is diving a little bit beneath the surface. You get more into the subconscious mind, the unconscious. Maybe I'd suggest talking about false memories with the paranormal. And how is that influenced by cognition? What do you suggest?
That's true. The false memories, we can ask Dr. Elliott because he had several cases that would involve false memories, if I remember correctly. Right, Dr. Elliott?
Well, yeah, memory's a funny thing. I always say that it starts to degrade as soon as you've perceived a situation. For example, in our police cadet training, they actually do a scenario in the classroom where an instructor will come in wearing a certain outfit and he will say certain things. It's very short. It's about 30 seconds. He'll leave the classroom. And then you have all 32 cadets write down what they thought the instructor was wearing and also what he said. And you'll actually get almost 32 different versions of what people saw and witnessed, especially when it happened so fast and so spontaneous. And unfortunately, in paranormal work, things are usually spontaneous and they do happen fast. So it's very similar. So you might get multiple different witnesses that are telling you different stories, and they're not necessarily lying to you. They certainly believe that their story, and that is what they perceived. So it's definitely something that you have to be cognizant of when doing paranormal investigations, as well as interviewing them separately. I know it can be tough when we usually get contacted to do an investigation. We'll do an initial interview, and depending on the distance, we'll try and do it over Zoom, because I believe audio video is your best evidence. You also pick up on body language and uh, cues and things like that that you might not necessarily get over the phone. But I find interviewing the complainant or the person that has contacted you with their issue, once they're telling the story, you always hear somebody in the background chime in. So they're not necessarily alone, and they're kind of getting feedback from other people as well. So you have to be really cognizant of that when you're interviewing people. There's a lot of different things that can affect the quality of the data that you're collecting.
Yeah, and we will be speaking about the suggestibility, of course,
And
because one
perhaps
can
confirmation.
and confirmation bias, yes, but with the suggestibility, it is such a interesting field that we don't even notice how it happens to us through a normal everyday basis. So day to day, we go really unaware of what is happening to us and what is affecting our perception. And we have our preferences, for example, affected by what we see and hear, by the societal norms, because people from different societies, they have different predispositions. See how just the society, the news and media, how they affect us in our decision making. So with the suggestibility, for example, there is a crowd effect as well. Like if somebody saw something, there was a study done with the key bending situation where people who saw, there were two groups of this research. So one group was actually witnessing the metal key being bent, and at the same time there were lots of people around speaking and saying, "Oh yes, I did. I saw. He's so magnificent. He's just a magician, having such incredible powers that we don't have." And people hearing that really believed that the key was being bent by the power of suggestion, by the power of the mind, versus the second group that was viewing that through the video. And they also saw the same thing, the key being bent, but at the same time, there were skeptics in the room telling them, "Oh, it is not possible. It's just a trick." And they were less gullible and they were less willing to believe that this is an actual thing what they're seeing. So where is the reality? So when it gets, for example, to going to the fields of investigation, Dr. Elliott, right? So when we go there, we see, okay, what is real and what is not? What has been affecting by the crowd or by the previous history of the place, correct? Or what has not been? And you mentioned the interviewing process. In the interviewing process, we're always warned against leading questions, because leading questions can already plant an answer into the person's mind that is going to be suitable for the person who is asking that question.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Certainly, it could create a bias if you ask leading questions. There's also cognitive bias as well that you'd have to be concerned about. But Dr. Punch, with memory, the way memory works is that they're not necessarily static, and each time somebody recalls a memory, you can possibly build upon that story. So, in your opinion, what do you think is kind of your best window to obtain the purest version statement from somebody when you're conducting, a field investigation in the paranormal?
I actually don't work in the paranormal. I work more with psychology. So this is more of my questions will be to you with regard to the paranormal. However, I will answer your question and say I believe that memory is a subjective experience. It's based on the person's experience. If you were to ask certain questions, if there is a confirmation bias there or a cognitive bias there, based on that person's existing beliefs or what they believe they've seen, that's what they're going to interpret based on their perception or their altered state of perception. Perhaps using some hypnosis, therapeutic hypnosis may allow somebody to tap into the subconscious mind, perhaps to bring up memories. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
We
no,
are forget Dr. Elliott, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're forgetting to say that Dr. Punch is actually joining us from Louisiana, from the New Orleans area. So this is so interesting. And she was talking to me, in fact, just recently about the cemeteries. And again, we can talk about the cognitive bias of that cemetery that is New Orleans, and where all those famous, what are they called? Dr. Sherry, what are they called?
Crypts?
Mystic people are buried, the ones that been working in
Oh,
the
yes.
field of magic, I guess. I forget what the priestesses, I guess, right? So
Oh,
where they're
yeah.
buried. Voodoo, that's right. How could I forget that word? So what happens is that when I was several years back, right after the flooding, I remember there were so many people going to cemeteries and actually putting the little notes with their wishes at the cemetery, right near the grave of the deceased person. So, what is that? Is this the mass psychosis? Is this the mass understanding of some false belief? What is it?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, Dr. Sherry. Yes.
Okay.
So what do you think? What is your understanding of that?
My understanding would be some kind of a connection. I think you have skeptics and believers in the paranormal. I believe it's a way to connect. It could somehow transforming your cognitive beliefs beyond reality, feeling like there's something beyond that you're seeing that will enable you to be connected to this entity that is actually no longer here. It's buried. So there's a deeper belief, I would say.
And of course, what we would think that those people probably don't know what they're doing, and we can, as psychologists, we can interpret that from the point of view of the cognitive bias and just completely disregard their own personal experiences, but at the same time, they believe. This is their belief, and this is the unknown for them as well. But what they know is that that person is capable of fulfilling their wishes.
Indeed, I think anyone who has a feeling with a paranormal that's beyond what we can explain or unravel, I do believe it's subjective, and I find it really discouraging to argue against someone's subjective belief, because I don't think it's our judgment to tell whether or not someone's actually seeing or feeling or sensing or tasting or hearing or comprehending what they truly are. However, as you spoke earlier in the program, it's like, is it a part of the cognition? Is it really just in the mind? Is it beyond us, outside of us, or is it all really just inside?
Exactly. And with the phenomenological study, we study all of those interesting experiences that have the reflection in our hearts and our minds as well. So for those people, perhaps this is an authentic belief and something that they can use on an everyday basis to help themselves, to help their psychological health, emotional health, and even physical health, believing that that person who is deceased is going to help them from the other side.
Perhaps a
So
superstition?
that's a very interesting concept, the superstition. Yeah, but superstitions, they don't come from the thin air, correct? There's something sense behind it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. This is so interesting. I was actually also thinking that while memory plays such a huge role in our understanding and the perception process of the reality, there can actually be some different variance on understanding or even perceiving the reality differently with an altered state of perception. Like, for example, a lot of the times people can sense electromagnetic fields. And the majority of us, of course, we don't feel that exactly, but some of us who are very sensitive to it can feel the electromagnetic fields. And some areas, allegedly haunted places, they have higher electromagnetic fields, that they are situated on some areas that have the electromagnetic fields that are so distinct from other areas. And by being present in those places, they can hear voices, they can see apparitions, and for them, it becomes a reality. While another person who is not so sensitive is going to get into that house, haunted supposedly house, will not feel anything in that regard. So, Dr. Elliott, have you had that in your practice?
Yeah, we have actually. There was a case that my colleague Dr. Darrell Walsh had, where an individual was experiencing a haunting in their bedroom, usually late at night while they were asleep. So they were kind of in between the sleep-wake states. And upon investigation, of course, when you come in and conduct a scientific investigation of a location that's allegedly haunted, one of the things that you look for are electromagnetic field radiation disturbances. And what he had noticed in this particular investigation was there was an old alarm clock from like the 1960s or 1970s that was unshielded and was giving off excessive amounts of electromagnetic radiation. And we've had some studies done in laboratories by the work of Dr. Michael Persinger up in Laurentian University in Ontario. And he found that by stimulating the temporal lobes in the brain, which are located just around where your ears are, once it hit a certain level of magnetism, individuals would start to experience haunting characteristics. They'd feel the feeling that they're being watched. They would start to see apparitions. So, of course, the people that are experiencing this environmental effect are perceiving it normally because that's what they are perceiving. And of course, their brain is recording that information properly, but it's not necessarily paranormal phenomena that's causing it. It's more an environmental factor. So in this particular case, once that alarm clock was removed and replaced with a more modern current alarm clock, ironically, the apparition stopped appearing to this individual late at night, which kind of goes to support Dr. Michael Persinger's work about geomagnetic and electromagnetic field radiation affecting the temporal lobe and causing people to perceive apparitions. So that is something that you have to be cognizant of when you're conducting investigations, for sure. And again, to that individual, when you're interviewing them, they think that was a real experience, because to them it was a real experience. That's what they were perceiving, and that's what their memory encoded. But it's not necessarily paranormal. It can be environmental as well.
In that, I think that it is very important to keep in mind that this is a natural occurrence. And now, especially at this time when the sun has reached its peak of activity, and electromagnetic fields are going crazy on Earth once with the solar wind and also with the solar flares that when they finally reach the surface of the Earth. But there is disturbance. If we can get the radio blackouts and electricity blackouts, imagine how that affects the human body. And those people who are sensitive, they of course will be affected by that, and they will be experiencing more of those events than probably in the times without the electromagnetic activity, heightened electromagnetic activity of the sun on Earth. I, for example, know I can even sense it when the sun has this spot, for example, that when we have a solar flare, when the electromagnetic field is disturbed here on Earth, I can sense it and I feel really bad. And I, of course, and I check it, and sure enough, there is a disturbance. And for me, I don't see anything per se, but my reality, my perception of the reality is changed. And the way I hear things, the way I perceive things are different. It's as if being in some sort of dissociative state. So it is possible that things like that could also cause altered perception. And they do not necessarily have to be subjected to hypnosis, for example, or anything else for that regard. So with a natural occurrence, we have to understand that sometimes being skeptical can actually bring us more answers than not. And of course, I'm not disregarding the true haunting experiences, of course, and perceptions that are not related to electromagnetic activity. But we have to be really cognizant of what is happening and try to find the answers through the scientific means. For example, you and I, Dr. Elliott, was spoken about the carbon monoxide poisoning. That is also very important because just recently our neighbors said that there was a leak of gas. And if we didn't know, for example, about it, some people would be, if they were poisoned to a certain degree, they would be also could be experiencing some hallucinations and audio disturbances. So it is an easy
Yep.
thing in our present world. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure that's accurate. Dr. Punch, what's your experience with how people experience things under emotional stress, and how the cognitive process works when somebody's experiencing, stress? That, a lot of haunting situations can be very stressful for some people. So if somebody's experiencing, stress, how does that affect memory and cognition?
I think trauma. I was trauma. I think some people may grasp onto paranormal as a way of maybe as a coping mechanism. Perhaps
I've seen that. Yep.
I've spoken to people I've been working with who have seen apparitions, who are these people of a loved one they've lost, deep in grief. I believe when somebody is held down by grief, I believe connections with the person that they've lost in the paranormal realm or that experience connects to that type of trauma and stress. I believe stress can definitely alter our perception of reality. We may believe things or sense things that are really not there, or maybe become very anxious, panic attacks, perhaps, maybe an element of that or a factor. I'd say I think more recently, a lot of people are using pseudo healing, or maybe that's just a term. It's called pseudo healing. They're using psychedelics as an altered state. So perhaps somebody is suffering from some type of trauma in their life. They may even reach out to something that will actually alter their state of reality to perhaps deal with the traumas. And perhaps even if it's not just an immediate trauma, it could be trauma from childhood, just stress all above.
And during those times, of course, during traumatic events, there is a degree of dissociation. While dissociation can be a natural response of our psyche to protect itself or to deal with a reality, during such stressful conditions, dissociation can be amplified. And during just those times, it is possible to perceive the reality through a different lens. And so interesting that you have mentioned the LSD, for example, that the people are trying to cope with their traumas this way by going this route, trying LSDs or different like psilocybin, right? What
Yes,
is it?
psilocybin.
The Mars
Yeah.
psilocybin, right? What happens is that I see I can't even pronounce it, and now you can tell that I've never taken that. Okay, psilocybin, right? So that can even alter perception on a totally different level. And I know a lot of people are also going to Amazons, to the shamans, and trying something is called ayahuasca by drinking some concoction and going to total physical, I can't say really collapse, but inability to move. However, they have an extreme visuals and hallucinations that they do have commonalities. And they claim that they can heal themselves this way. So this is very interesting. While we talk about the apparitions, people on purpose take this kind of substances in order to cause those kinds of hallucinations in the hope to get to some sort of spiritual awakening. So that's very interesting. Then we would see that what is reality? Like, for example, if all those people during the ayahuasca process, if they take the same substance in, the majority of them actually they report the same visions of the big giant snake. So there's a saying that we all lose our minds individually, but we cannot really lose our mind in a crowd. So that would be like a crowd effect, right? You take that substance, and then and then you're experiencing something in the crowd with other people next to you, right? And not necessarily at the same time. You have to go to the jungles because your body cannot cope with that concoction, and by trying to get on a different level of spiritual development, then the jungle suffer from your inability to hold yourself physically as well. So that's a very interesting process that people actually uh, use the substances in order to cope with the stress that they have. And then the question comes up, what is the reality there? For those people that I've spoken who went through that process of ayahuasca, for those people, that's a real tangible process, and they have had incredible spiritual manifestations that altered their lives, sometimes profoundly, and have changed the course of their lives. So what is the reality? What is good and what is not? It is, like you said, Dr. Sherry, it is really subjective what works on our own personal level. This is my understanding.
And I think anyone under the not spell, let me try to put a different word here, when you're using a
Yeah, exactly.
type of experience outside of yourself to get clarity, I would suggest that it makes you very suggestible. Because if you have the belief and that something will change you more than likely will change. So if you believe LSD, mushrooms, psilocybin, DMT, or ayahuasca will change your journey, then if anything you believe in, I believe, can give you the power to move forward and transform your experience.
I will just call it its own name, mushroom shroomies. You know that's what people call them.
We should have all taken some. Give it a shot.
Come on, guys. Dr. Sherry, it's Dr. Sherry and I had a very interesting experience once. I can't say that I've never tried mushrooms, but it actually happened very unexpectedly. Her and I, we were at the party one time. And after the party, we went to the park, right? To Balboa Park, remember, here in San Diego, when you were
Mhm.
here. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm having some hallucinations. What is happening with me? The trees are moving all of a sudden. And she's like, Yana, what did you eat at the party? I said, I ate nothing. I found some chocolate in the next room and I just had some chocolate. She said, how many pieces did you have? And I said, I had 2 pieces of chocolate. And she said, oh my God. So she understood immediately what it could mean. You know, it's California, Southern California. It's totally normal for to have brownies or mushrooms for that regard and different kind of variations. And that's what it was. And the funny thing, and I was laughing after that, I was hallucinating. And I said, well, Sherry, what is it? And she's like, you know, it could be mushrooms. And I'm like, oh my God, what is it? So she told me about it. And at that time, we were doing the Ph.D. We were studying, like, my God, what am I going to do? And I said, I need to go to the hospital. And she said, no, you don't. And then in my mind, I thought, okay, like which state? How many years? What is it? What are the consequences of that? How many years in prison? What's for possession and everything else? I said, okay, I don't need it. I don't need it. I'm gonna be fine. So what happened? Do you remember? We were walking, and I said, okay. I felt so bad that I said, I need an angel to come and save me from here. Just take me home to some safe place. And I'm like, okay, I need an angel. Guess what happened after that? I hope you remember that. So
I
what
remember.
happened is, what happened is that your friend calls you out of the blue, right? And her name was Angel. And
Mm-hmm.
it was such a bizarre experience. And I said, Angel, please take us home. And she came and she took us home. You know, since then I've been really careful tasting anything at the parties. So I'm telling you, it was such a interesting experience. But for me at the time, it was the reality. I saw so many things, so many awful things. And the good thing about that experience, in fact, which I'm not suggesting other people do that, please don't. This is not what I'm advocating for here.
Test your chocolate.
It's
I'm
the
gonna be
chocolate people,
paranoid.
right?
I'm gonna be paranoid now at the next party. Any chocolate I see.
Well, when you come to California, be careful, you know. So, but the good thing happened actually for me, for a psychologist. I was working with people. I actually was able to understand what people go through in psychosis. And if I didn't have that kind of experience, I would be working with people with just educational understanding, academic understanding of what is happening with them. By knowing that on such an intimate level, by seeing all of those apparitions myself caused by shroomies, that I was able to understand and help people better. So that was one of the funny experiences that I had. So I hope you had a good laugh out of it, but I don't suggest for people to go out, of course, and to try any kind of mind-altering substances, because it can be also not healthy for certain individuals, especially people with not stable psyches, people, for example, with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, should definitely be very careful trying any substances like that. And even if they try to help themselves or seek some sort of spiritual awakening, that has to be really approached with caution. So now I took us all into this a totally different route. Now let's get back. Let's get back, people. Come back. Come back to the studio. Come back. Okay.
I think it's very intriguing because when you take those types of substances, you can have a good experience or a bad or a negative. So it's
Exactly,
very
because I
interesting in
remember,
your perception of
I, re-
reality.
I remember, Dr. Sherry, you told me you understood what was happening, and you're like, why don't you just enjoy the experience? And I
Mhm.
said, I can't enjoy it because
You
what I
couldn't.
see is so horrible. I see demons, I see everything. And in my understanding, that's what it was. This was the demon, and there were so many of them, and they were running alongside of me. So, that was very difficult. Yeah, it could be a good experience, could be bad. And especially with people with some problems, psychological problems, it could actually become very detrimental for their health, for psyches, for the mind, and the body as well. So really should be, whether it's a good trip or a bad trip, it should also always be taken with caution. The idea, not shroomies, with caution. The idea should be taken with caution.
Yeah, no,
So,
that's a good
yeah.
point. Even in cases that we deal with, and most people don't, that we've interviewed over the past 26 years, haven't really disclosed a whole lot about their illicit drug use. But even just prescription medications, we just had a case just last week where a gentleman, his wife passed away in January, and shortly after that, he started to see her in the apartment building. And we found out that he had been put on a ton of medications, all which have possible side effects of hallucinations. So we recommended that he have a med review done by a pharmacist, because sometimes, well, I know up here in Canada anyway, when the doctors, you come in with a nerve pain in your neck and then an upset stomach, the doctor will prescribe you a medication based on your symptoms, but sometimes in totality, all the medications that you're taking, they don't really pay attention to that. And the pharmacist knows the chemical, biological process a lot better usually. So that was one of our recommendations, is that he goes for a med review, just because he had never experienced anything paranormal before this. And then now all of a sudden he's put on all these medications that do have symptoms of, or possible symptoms of, hallucination side effects. So yeah, it is something that you have to be cognizant of. And then there's other people that will microdose, with psilocybin, or take drugs to alter their state of consciousness to help open up their psychic abilities. And there's been some studies done of that, where people will actually become more psychic on substances. So it's a fine line. I think, like you guys both said, it depends on how you react to it. Some people have a good experience with it, and some people don't.
Mhm.
I think I lost you guys for a few seconds, and I'm back. Definitely. Did you ask me a question or something? It just the
Nope.
silence. Oh, you didn't ask
Nope.
me. Okay.
No, we didn't ask twice.
Why
I don't
not?
think
Why
she
not?
ever
Why did
came
you
out of
ask
the
me
shroom
questions?
trip.
Ask me questions, guys. Yeah, just 2 seconds, and I lost it. It was years back. It was years back. Yeah. So for sure, some medications can actually cause hallucinations with dopaminergic agents, antidepressants, and corticosteroids. I know just with a recent case, one of the patients, in fact, she was an older lady, and she had dementia. And with the medications, the steroids that she was taking, she started to develop hallucinations. And she started seeing all of her dead relatives. And of course, at the beginning, it was very concerning to the family. But later, they started laughing at that because there's nothing that they could do, not laughing at her, but actually not being so concerned and telling her this is not the truth, because for the person who is experiencing that, even medications or not, that is the reality. And it is impossible to tell the person, no, this is not what you're seeing. If that is their reality, then somehow we have to be able to approach them differently, with more compassion, of course. But if we go to those investigations and we understand that some people can see those apparitions, or they are perceiving something that other people are not, it's absolutely important to look at the medical history somehow, and be able to determine the cause of it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Dr. Punch, I'm interested in asking you about your experience in believers. So there's been some parapsychological studies that have been done which shows that believers tend to experience paranormal phenomena more so than skeptical individuals. What would you say about the cognitive process involving that, a believer versus skeptic? Why do you think that believers experience, in this instance, paranormal phenomena more so than a skeptic would?
Well, I think anything we're unwilling to go against that's not aligned with our own belief, it's going to be very difficult for us to believe. I think that brings us back to that confirmation bias. So if I don't believe in something, I'm going to be skeptical that you can believe that. So if I don't believe that people can see ghosts or hear things or see things, I'm going to be very skeptical to believe that, because personally, it may not be something that I experience. So cognitively, from a cognitive perspective, it's cognitive is about, I look at it as like perception and how do you perceive. So as a believer, you're going to be more apt to believe in it, and as a skeptic, you're not going to. I think go ahead.
No, it makes me wonder if skeptical people are actually experiencing anything that's unusual, but they're somehow rationalizing it away, because like you said, it goes against your beliefs, so you're not going to be exactly on board with that perception. You're going to try and talk yourself out of it and say, I must have just saw something out of the corner of my eye, or I didn't sleep very well last night, and so it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I think that's really important.
And I think that some people who do not believe will also find things to debate. They will look out and find like maybe another podcast that will debunk someone who's in the paranormal. They will actually seek out these types of things. I think maybe this brings up the topic of intuition. And how do you, because sometimes you'll be faced with something, and is it like, am I really in fear, or is this intuition? Can you both elaborate a little bit more on intuition?
Well, intuition, so it's funny. I don't really consider myself to be psychic or a medium at all, but I do feel like I have pretty good intuition. I was a police officer for 15 years, so you have to have some intuition as a police officer.
Yeah.
You're gonna get yourself in trouble. But I mean, just there'd be situations like you pull a car over. They weren't necessarily doing anything crazy. There was just, you kind of get that vibe, you call it, or that spider sense that they would refer to. You pull the car over, you check their license, you'd start kind of going through some process, and there'd just be something that's not sitting right with you intuition wise, and somehow you get a lead to investigate a little bit further. And I know one time the guy had 50 stolen identifications in the back of his trunk, and it turned into this massive fraud investigation where I ended up working on it for like 6 months, and it was all just from a simple traffic stop. And then I tell my wife all the time, I stopped going against my gut feeling, because I'll get a gut feeling and I'll do the complete opposite, and I usually pay the price for it. So what I started doing is, if I get a inkling or that intuition, I go with it now rather than try and go against it, because every time I do go against it, it usually turns out to be a stupid decision. So I do think intuition is very important, and it would be interesting. You would be more of an expert on that part, but from the perception and the cognitive perspective from that, what would your take be on intuition?
Intuition, I believe, is when you feel intuition, it shouldn't be of anxiety. It should be a feeling of calm. It should be a feeling of knowing. I think that's where the cognitive process and that perception can be altered. So we may, like Yana said earlier, disassociate with what's going on in our mind. So as you're saying, you may have a gut feeling, but you may not act on it. So I think it's in the cognitive process, it's just a matter of your perception and being in tuned or attuned. And, but I think that takes work.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I agree with you there. Like there was lots of times like I said, I would go against my intuition, and then I'd be wrong, or things would get messed up, and then I'd be fixing a problem. Whereas if I had followed my intuition, everything would have been fine. So it took me a little while to learn that lesson, but I follow it now.
Now you have the courage.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And when it comes to me, same as what you described, it's not like anxiety. It's just like, I got a feeling maybe I, shouldn't do this, or I got a feeling like I should do this. It's just kind of like more like you said, it's like a sense of knowing, or almost like you feel like you're being directed one way and you should follow that, because if you don't, there could possibly be consequences, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And with the intuition, I believe that what is intuition? Intel, meaning being in God, receiving some sort of understanding that is not of your cognitive abilities, doesn't come from you. And ladies and gentlemen, we're having this conversation on intuition, on perception and memory, and the connection to the paranormal on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, from a beautiful New Orleans, where our special guest, Dr. Sherry, is from right now. And this interesting topic of intuition, I believe that we should be listening to it. However, how do we distinguish whether that's an intuition or some sort of thing that affected our perception? Like, for example, yesterday we saw a movie, um, explosion of the bus, for example, right, in some city. And then today, uh, we see the same kind of we see the highway and there's a bus and we're thinking, oh, it might explode, for example, right? So how do we know how to act in situations like that, whether it's our perception uh, that was affected by the external factors, or is there our intuition that we have to act upon it immediately to save people, for example, right? So how do we know that, Dr. Sherry?
How do we
What do you have?
know?
Yeah, how do we know?
Well, I think cognition has to do with reason. Intuition is it's without reason. So I would just say anytime there's an intuitive feeling and that you're in tuned, when you make the decision to go with your intuition, it should feel good, as though it's a knowing, and it should feel you should be at peace. However, if you're not at peace, there may be some type of cognitive distortion going on within, and it
That
may
is
be
so
because
incredibly said. Hmm.
so maybe fear. And that's what is there's real fear, well, rational fear, irrational fear. And I think a lot of times irrational fear causes us to feel like we have a gut feeling, yet it's not really the intuition. That's more fear based.
Hmm. That's interesting. What's your take on deja vu, that feeling that you've already experienced something in the present situation? I know, scientifically, we haven't really come to a formal, finalized conclusion of what deja vu is. What's your beliefs on that, Dr. Sherry?
From a psychological perspective, I believe it. I would say it's most likely parts of the unconscious tapping is bringing to light something that we want to have to see. I'm not really familiar. I've experienced what you're speaking of. Uh, I don't know if you could ever scientifically prove it, which probably makes it so beautiful that way that you can't scientifically prove it. Because there's an element about scientifically proving things that takes away the essence of of what that experience is. So when you add science to something, I think it kind of jades something. Deja vu, cognitive wise, I think it has to do with something beneath the surface coming out.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
most people have probably experienced it. Whether it's you're talking to somebody and you're like, I've felt like I've had this exact conversation before, or you're experiencing something and it's your first time experiencing it, but all of a sudden that deja vu kicks in and you're like, I feel like I've done this before. It's such a strange feeling that
Hmm.
happens to a lot of people, and just very spontaneously.
Yes.
It seems
I
to
had a,
trigger some sort of similarity or familiarity that you've experienced before.
Yeah. A connection.
guys,
Mm.
I've been pondering this question for quite some time, the idea of the deja vu, because I've been recording my dreams since I was 16. And with the moments of deja vu, every time that I would have it and I I had it quite often over the years, I would go back and search my dream book. And surely enough, a year or two, or even several years before that, I would see this exact scene in my dreams. And of course, it takes diligence to record your dreams. Doesn't matter how bizarre they are, but at the same time, for myself, I was able to answer that question that I had already seen that before. Whatever that situation was already described or written in some sort of a parallel field. Like, for example, people talk about Akashic records. Akashic records, in my understanding, is nothing else than this big cloud where we store all of our information, right? My information is in a cloud. Um, so it is, when we think about it, there was a movie with the Rambo, The Last Rambo. Remember the guys that he was already in his 70s, and his son says that, "Oh, I already have this information. It's in the cloud." He's like, "Look there, which cloud?" You know. So all of that information is written in the cloud, and the cloud is essentially all of that massive storage of information that we can tap into and get some information. So I remember one time, it was how many years ago? Probably about 7 years ago, when the movie The Accountant came out. And I went to the movies with a friend of mine. And as I was watching the movie, I was just telling him all the time in the ear during the movies that this is going to happen now. I already seen it. And this scene is going to come after this scene. So he got so frustrated. He's like, "Stop telling me that." And I said, "This is incredible. They say it's a new movie when this is an old movie and I've seen it before." So when the movie was over and I realized that it was just made, and in my understanding that I had already seen that movie before, probably 10 or 15 years earlier, it started me thinking that, where did I actually see this information? And I started digging in my dream book. And surely enough, some of the pieces of that movie I already saw, and I recorded that in detail 10 years earlier. So for me, it is the ability to tap into some sort of the informational cloud. We will be speaking with a modern terminology. We're tapping into something that is giving us the glimpse into things that are going to come in the future. So that has been my work. And of course, what do we do? It's a phenomenological study of your own self, right? Of your own dreams. And how do you come to a certain understanding? And for me, that's what it was. It's something that we had already seen. Okay, what is a deja vu? Something that we had already seen. And seen where? Perhaps in our dreams. So if we are more attuned to ourselves, if we're more listening to ourselves, that we've been discussing the intuition, then we will be more understanding more of the certain phenomena that is seemingly unexplained as it is right now, even by the science. So what it is not explained by the science, we ourselves can draw the line between certain observations that we have had and the phenomenon. I'm passing on the microphone to Dr. Elliott.
No, I agree with you what you're saying. I was actually thinking about when you were talking about that, it was kind of triggering another thought about the hypnotic regression, which I know you have experience with, Dr. Yana, and just how sometimes false memories can kind of come up during hypnosis and things like that. And I'm wondering from Dr. Sherry what the cognitive process is with respect to that, getting false memories drawn out of hypnosis. Why do you think that happens? What happens with the brain in that process?
I think Yana touched on it earlier when she says that he used the word disassociation. I think there could be a false memory. There could be a trauma there. So perhaps a disassociation or something that would bring comfort in a stressful situation.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just something that Yana said, it kind of triggered me to think about that. I know I did a memory presentation during one of my master's programs, and there was a point in time. It was during I want to say like the 70s when the APA, the American Psychological Association, had to put out a notice for counselors to be cognizant of when they are doing hypnosis with sex assault victims, because there was a lot of false memories coming up during that period. And of course, hypnosis is also used in the paranormal as well. Different paranormal phenomena use it, such as recounting memories with alien abductees, for example. Hypnosis is used quite a bit there, also with past life regression work as well. So it's something that you have to be cognizant of as well in the field of paranormal, about false memories. But again, I like, that's the way I feel, is once you experience or perceive something, your memory almost starts to degrade right away. Especially the more times you tell the story, you might end up elaborating on things, and then that elaboration becomes a permanent memory, which might not necessarily have been the way that it had happened. So I find the whole process very fascinating, especially in our line of work, because as parapsychologists, parapsychology is a social science, because we are studying people's lived experiences with the paranormal. That's what we're looking at. It's all based on somebody else's experience, usually a spontaneous experience. So yeah, very, very fascinating.
And when you work with the
Well,
parapsychology, go ahead.
go ahead.
There's a branch of psychology. It's called anomalistic psychology, where they try to bring in a scientific principles. What do you think of that? Is that in relation to paranormal?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, so that kind of started to pop up in the late 2000s. That and transpersonal psychology, because transpersonal psychology kind of takes a spiritual approach to the psychological processes. Um, but yes, those two terms. There's a few universities that have programs in anomalistic psychology, transpersonal psychology, and that does kind of fall along the lines of parapsychology, because
Okay.
in universities now, there's not really, you might find the odd course here and there that's a parapsychology type course, but there's not a whole lot of places doing a full-on degree in parapsychology. In fact, one of the only spots is really the University of Edinburgh, where you can do your graduate degree in psychology, but you could specialize in parapsychology, usually under Dr. Carolyn Watt, who runs the Kessler Parapsychology Unit. But anomalistic psychology, yes, it does deal with the paranormal and paranormal beliefs. So anyone that's interested in kind of pursuing more academic education in the paranormal, that would be one route to go for sure.
Okay.
I always say as well, like you never know what skill set comes in handy with the paranormal. Like certainly if you have a background in physics, that can come, you know, in handy trying to explain certain things. I actually had an investigator that was a HVAC heat pump technician. And you'd think, oh, what's somebody that installs heat pumps know, about the paranormal? But he was actually very good, because we'd get videos of objects like a balloon, for example, moving very strangely. It would float and then it would duck underneath the beam, and then it would continue on, almost like somebody would perceive it as if like a child was carrying that balloon, or a ghost child was carrying that balloon. And he explained that even though the heat pump was turned off at the time, there's still air currents and they can still circulate around an environment for X amount of time. So you just never know what skill set could actually be used in a paranormal investigation.
Absolutely. And also, if you remember in the late 1900s, 19, I believe it was in 1998, the Coventry University, there was an interesting study done when some people at the lab were experiencing some paranormal events or some apparitions, where they were experience being touched, for example, or something being said to them, whispered into their ear. And turns out to be, after the investigation, that it was nothing but the low frequency sound emitting from the fan. It was actually
Mm.
the fan that did not have any noise. However, it was producing a low frequency noise that was below 20 hertz. And for some people, of course, it's not it's inaudible for most people. However, for some very sensitive people, they can hear that, and in them, it can cause fear, hallucinations, and um, audio hallucinations. So what happens is we perceive something that would be outwardly, when in fact, as you said, you never know. It's very important even to speak to physicists, to engineers about that. So the engineer actually had found that it was just a fan, and as soon as the fan was removed, all of this apparitions and outwardly experiences disappeared. So there are instances that serious instances of haunting that we cannot disregard that, of course, but we should also be able to stop and think, okay, like what is causing that? But if we don't know anything about it, then we won't be able to pinpoint. And who in the world will be going and thinking about frequencies? You know, that I remember that once I was listening to something on YouTube, one of those meditation channels, and I thought, okay, like I'm going to relax right now and I'm going to listen to it. Turns out to be that particular meditation for about 20 minutes that I was listening to had a low frequency uh, tone. And that caused nearly paranoia in me. I became so fearful. Something happens like, oh my God, I feel so bad. I'm possessed. Something is touching me, and then I thought, all right, like what is it? And I started investigating. And in the fine print, it said that there's a low frequency noise added to it. Evidently, they thought it would be has some healing properties. For me, it was the opposite. It was the paranoidal thoughts. So also that could be a factor in us perceiving something outwardly.
Yeah, absolutely. Infrasound is one of the the new kind of environmental factors that have been popping up, in paranormal research and investigation. It can cause psychological impacts, like you kind of described. For some people, obviously, that might have been like a relaxing meditation to listen to, but for other people, it could have caused them, feeling uneasy, or another common. You feel like somebody's watching you is another kind of common symptom that people report with low frequency sounds. They've done experimental studies as well, and it can affect people's human emotions and perceptions. And that's probably why somebody, had made that for meditation, because for some people it works, some people it doesn't. So that's definitely another kind of environmental factor that you have to consider. I would say most paranormal investigators, on the citizen scientists, I would say, are probably not looking at infrasound. We did actually, with our organization, Paranormal Phenomena Research Investigation, bought an infrasound machine, but we have to take a look at it and see how to use it. It comes with particular software, and we have to become familiar with it before we start using it. But it has been used to detect, for example, somebody was experiencing a haunting in one location, and when they used the infrasound machine, they actually were able to find out that there was an elevator in an apartment building just next door, and every time that elevator was operating, it was giving off infrasound that was affecting the house, and causing them to experience haunting characteristics. So it's definitely something that is becoming more and more out in the open and in the literature.
Yeah, and I think everyone's individual cognitive processes is unique. And I think that's what makes people more susceptible or suggestible in the variation of all of our experiences.
Well, yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think, like you said, you and I could even experience things differently, or different sounds could affect us, and we would perceive a situation differently. And yeah, it's you're right. It's individually based.
It's fascinating.
It is, yeah. It's really fascinating, especially like I go back to the police training when they get the instructor to come into the classroom and have us 32 police officers that are considered to be expert witnesses or will be expert witnesses when they start going and testifying in court. Experience 32 people experience something different, but in
Wow.
reality, only one thing happened. So yeah, no, it is. It's a fascinating phenomena for sure.
Absolutely.
I would like to come back a little bit into this infrasonic sounds and elaborate on that a little bit. Have you noticed that all of that, all of those perceptions, all of those experiences were um, actually took place when people were unaware of when they were um, can't say really in a relaxed state of mind, but this state of unawareness and unexpectedness actually played a huge factor in it. Like, for example, those people with the elevator situation, they did not expect the elevator to affect them in any way. Nevertheless, subconsciously, there was this sound that would affect them on everyday basis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
And so whenever the elevator was operating, they wouldn't have even heard the frequency. It would have been too low for them to even hear. So they wouldn't have even thought that the elevator next door was affecting them.
So is this
yeah,
something
and they
that
could not
these
protect
sounds,
themselves.
is it something that's tapping into the unconscious? Is that what you're saying? These sounds or
I personally, I think there's a physiological effect to it. I think that the low frequency that we can't hear in some instances can cause people to um, experience some sort of sensation or a perception. And a lot of the common things with infrasound, which is that sound that we just can't hear, it's just at a frequency that we as humans can't hear. It can cause some physical effects like nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, but it can also cause feelings of being watched or fear, dread, different things like that. So I,
okay.
I think it's more like a physiological response and a psychological response as well to sounds that
It
we
is a
can't hear.
physiological and psychological. Everything
Yeah.
that you're describing, Dr. Elliott, is actually was experienced by the people in American embassy in Cuba,
Mm,
where they believed to be used. They were subjected to the use of the ultrasonic waves.
that's right.
And yes, there was confusion, there was cognitive disturbances, and the physical part. It was very difficult for those people to even comprehend their reality. And besides, it wasn't just one person; it was the entire embassy. And the study was done with the people years after the event when they were taken home already. They applied for disability. However, they could not receive the disability in the United States because that was not accepted widely. Of course, that they were affected by the ultrasonic weapons. In just a recent release, the investigation said that there was no ultrasonic weapon used on the embassy. However, if we just look at that, everything that you just described, and of course that if just regular citizens here or separate citizens can experience that, imagine if that was used as a weapon against the nations. If it was used against the embassy there, imagine if it was the city and town, and that is used in the military as well. So if we think that oh, we can down, we can become skeptics, and things like that don't happen, or the low frequency or ultrasonic weapons, there's something extraordinary, then we have to think again and to read more research on that and to understand that a lot of things can affect our mind and our psyche, and not necessarily it would be something outwardly, that we're not actually seeing the parallel worlds. There's so many factors that need to be ruled out before we actually understand that, oh yes, here is what I'm seeing. This is an apparition and this is is a valid objective apparition of something that just manifested in front of me. So that so many factors that need to be taken into the account.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, really interesting.
Like, for example, in the case of sleep paralysis, if we look at that, there's so many tales now circulating over the internet and also in books with the sleep paralysis when it is actually physiological response in a state of REM when people are just not able to move at the time, and it causes terror in them when they see something awful sitting on them. That, from the scientific perspective, it is nothing else but the trick that our mind plays in the state of REM when we're trying to fall asleep or just waking up. And of course, there are different explanations of that, that we have different kinds of entities sitting on us and trying to take advantage of us and stuff like that. So while for some people, it would be who were experiencing that, including myself when I experienced that, I said, oh my God, there's a huge entity sitting on me and I'm not able to get up. And uh, I had such a terrible sense of dread. Like, my God, what is happening here? I've never seen. And all of a sudden, here I am, a modern person, experiencing some entity sitting on me. It was so frightening, but it felt so real. So how can we disregard a situation like that? And of course, it causes all different kind of explanations, and not the only then the perspective from the sleep disorder perspective. So we
Yeah,
never
well,
know what it is.
like the three of us talked about, earlier tonight, to you, that was, a very real experience. If Dr. Sherry or I were in the room, we might not have necessarily seen the same thing that you were seeing. I know one neuroscientist kind of explanation for that is that the sleep paralysis can happen when the brain awakes rapidly from the rapid eye movement sleep stage, where the body's still paralyzed, and the body paralyzes itself during sleep so that we don't act out our dreams. Um, in fact, I had surgery this year. It was kind of ironic. I had some surgery this year, and they gave me hydromorphone as the painkiller. And so I had taken it, and I get like really pretty wild dreams sometimes because of my policing career. So anyway, I had this dream that I was chasing a suspect, and that I had to like jump on him and tackle him. And I actually threw myself out of bed, and I woke myself up because my dog sleeps next to me. So he growled because he was like, I woke him up, and he growled at me. And then Sarah woke up because she heard a big thud. And I woke up because I didn't know what was going on. I was just on the floor, and I started thinking about it. I said, oh, the last thing I remember is I was dreaming about chasing, the suspect, and I had to jump, but I must have physically jumped out of bed. So that was a very quick. Now, I didn't like wake up and see like the bad guy from my dream or anything like that, but that was obviously a case where I was in a very deep sleep, and then all of a sudden, my body, for whatever reason, maybe the morphine didn't paralyze itself, and I almost hurt myself by throwing myself out of the bed. So, I've certainly experienced something like that, but I could only imagine. I have interviewed people that have experienced sleep paralysis and have seen, they've reported demons or shadows or entities, and I can only imagine how, frightful that would be, because you would really be experiencing that.
But then the question comes up, guys. The question comes up. Why do we see bad things? Why do we see demons? Why can't we, during that time, if we're normal human beings with a positive outlook on life, why don't we see good, positive beings bringing us flowers, for example, or a cake or a birthday cake or something like that? Why does it have to be such a frightening experience?
I don't know if Dr. Sherry has an answer, but I'm always puzzled by the mind, because we've survived for a long time, and we've got natural instincts built within us because evolution, and because we've evolved, for so many years. But I still find it interesting that, given how far we've come and how much we've evolved, is our mind is like our biggest enemy. Our mind is always trying to tear us down. It's always trying to provide doubt to us. It's always, self-talking to us in a very negative way. And I just can't understand that for a species that has survived for so long. You think that the mind, would have evolved, but for whatever reason, it likes to produce a lot of negative, thoughts. And so, I mean, that could be possibly one reason why we experience negative things. The mind is just very negative sometimes. I don't know, Dr.
Well,
Sherry, do you have anything to?
especially,
Well, I believe that we do have. I believe the mind has evolved tremendously. I don't think that the primitive mind, our reptilian brain, has the ability to perhaps keep up, because our social construction, our environment teaches us different things. I think the fears we used to have to have, our survival instincts are no longer needed. So I think it's just become confused. As maybe confused is not the right terminology here. However, I think we have a lot of irrational fear that we deal with on a daily basis. And if we don't learn how to deal with those things, they may come up in our dreams. That may just be one aspect of that.
That's very fascinating.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm a very positive human being. I don't have those kind of experiences. Everything is so nice and positive, and
I'm smelling roses.
roses, right? Like nothing. What's wrong with you guys? Some pathological experiences. What's wrong with you? I'm so good. Everything is so positive and nice. Well, of course, that's not the case. But there are some people that, of course, will be talking about it, saying, "Well, if I'm such a good human being and positive, what kind of irrational fears are you talking about, Dr. Sherry? What irrational fears? I don't have any irrational fears." And then, for example, that the same speaking about surgeries. Of course, we're not going to be talking about all surgeries that we've ever had, but of one of them that I remember, on the positive note, for example, I remember that I was so worried about the outcome that I asked all of the nurses and the doctor there. I said, "All right, let's just pause and pray." And I was so surprised at the time that in Southern California, they actually stopped and they prayed. And it wasn't just because of me. And I thought, they're just going to disregard it completely, that nothing like that exists. And that's the doctor. And surely enough, he doesn't believe in anything like that. They all stopped and the surgeon's hands. And I said, "Well, I'm blessing your hands." And he accepted that. He accepted that thankfully and gratefully, because for him, that was something acceptable from his culture. And he was the doctor from India as well. And they understand the power of the blessing in this regard. Of course, we here also understand the power of blessing. And I'm not suggesting that, but he was readily accepting it without suggesting that it is so inappropriate. We can't talk about it here. And the interesting thing that happened is that I don't know whether it was a power of suggestion or power of a thought. I remember as I was dozing off, I saw four light beings surrounding me with the nurses and with the doctors. But this is the last thing I remember, that they stood right around me, and there were nurses around as well. So just unlike you guys, I'm really positive. We're really nice and positive experiences. So much negativity. Come on, we just have to lighten up a little bit. There are good things in life as well. Such a great conversation we're having here. I'm enjoying it immensely. We are, I think that we are out of time right now. We have been with Dr. Sherry. Dr. Sherry Parr, she's a clinical psychologist, and we've been discussing the incredible topic of memory, perception, and the paranormal. And with incredible Dr. Elliott, and not less incredible myself. So you have to praise yourself. You have to praise yourself because you will never hear that from other people. So you're sitting there not saying anything about me.
I think you were the highlight of the night with your trip on the psilocybin. That made my night. That made my night.
See?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Do not
that
try
was
this
a
at
very
home.
scary, that was a very scary experience. And Sherry, you remember that? It was so bad. It was so bad for me.
Yes,
It was
we
scary.
call up the
That was
trip.
scary. So you
So
see that.
that's the one time that you don't surround yourself with positivity. Then is when you're on the psilocybin. That's when your demons come out.
Exactly. That's my demons come out, and that's I will never do that again. that felt really bad, in fact. And all of the warnings, Dr. Sherry, that you gave me, oh, just enjoy it. I couldn't. I wanted to get back into my head right away, immediately. So instead of 4 hours that it usually takes, it took me just 2 hours. And I came back to myself. I shoved my senses, my intellect, everything else back into my head, and I put myself together. I was back to normal again. So I hope that we can meet again and have this similar incredible conversation again on a different topic next time. So we have been live on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, streaming from Louisiana, from beautiful New Orleans. And we've been here with Dr. Elliott and Dr. Sherry and Dr. Yana. And we hope to see you again next week. Good to see you.
Yes,
Have a good night,
thank you very
everybody.
much, Dr. Punch. Thank you.
Grateful for the experience. Thank you. Good night from New Orleans.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night, guys. Bye.
You too.